Joining me now is Pastor Tom Hughes. He's a first-time guest here. Hopefully he'll come back. We'll see if he's happy after we get done talking to him. I hope he will be. He is a good friend with Patrick Wood as well as Dr. Andy Woods, and I would venture to guess we have several other mutual friends, but we meet for the first time tonight. He's the founder of the 412 Churches, as well as a regular conference speaker. And I think he takes regular trips to Israel. I just saw where he was there in Israel on his social media account, which we'll tell you about here in just a moment. He joins us now. Pastor Tom Hughes, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, man, this is fantastic. First time ever. Man, I'm excited.
Glad
Great
to have
to
you
meet
here.
you.
You too.
I'm really glad to be here.
We have a lot of mutual friends, don't we?
We do. We have an awful lot of mutual friends. I see them on your program. I watch, and now, man, I get to be on here. I can, like, pinch myself.
Well, we're glad you're here. Now, did you just get back from Israel?
I did. Yes. In fact, this is the very first program, mine or being on anybody, since I've been back from Israel.
Well, good. I'm sure you got a little jet lag, so thank you for being with us. Man, there's so much that we can talk about. I want to get right away, though. Tell our audience a little bit about who you are before I get into my questions.
So I've been a pastor for about 30 years, and I started at Calvary Chapels. I know, what's her name? Candace Owens. She's going after all the Calvary Chapel pastors now. So I guess I'm in good company.
I gotta say, that must mean you're the good guys if she's going after you.
That's the way I figure it. Everything she's going after, I'm thinking, oh, this is crazy. So then I was on staff as a pastor on Greg Laurie's staff for a number of years. And then I became a lead pastor for about 22 years ago and started 412 Churches, as you mentioned. And but I've been doing Bible prophecy for, I'd say, a good 30 years now.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you with us as well. Your reputation precedes you, and it's all good from what I hear, and from our viewers as well as our broadcast partners. Well, let's talk about many things in that Bible prophecy realm, where we are in this church age. I'm doing a series. I just finished up a year and a half teaching through the book of Revelation verse by verse, then went right into the next week. Why I'm a Christian Zionist, part 1. Last night, Sunday night, was Why I'm a Christian Zionist, part 2, and spent most of the evening in Romans chapter 11. Now, the fact that you've been doing this so long, are you shocked or not at the rise of anti-Semitism, not only within the so-called America First MAGA world, but within the evangelical church and the fast rise of replacement theology for the new people, the belief that God is done with the nation of Israel. He's replaced Israel with the church. All the blessings given to Israel are to be given to the church now, which, of course, they never want any of the curses, only the blessings. Are you shocked at that, particularly with the rise of neo-Calvinism, hyper-Calvinism, John Calvin, Augustine? Are you shocked at how this has spilled into denominations that are not traditionally Calvinistic? So the question really in the nutshell with that background, the speed of anti-Semitism in the modern church and in politics and even the MAGA America First movement. Any of this shock you?
So I would say it's the speed of it and the fact that we are still here witnessing it.
Yes,
is what's a shock, and it's also greatly discouraging to watch what's happening in the church. Now, you and I both know we were expecting something like this to happen because we know what the Bible says, but to see it happening at the level that it's happening is troubling. And I guess I could use the word shocking. I was speaking at a conference, I think it was about a year ago in Arizona. And I didn't remember saying it, but after I was done, I had 2 different people come up to me and said, well, you said half the people that are in this group right now will probably no longer support Israel within a year. And I said that? They said, yes, you did. And I look back now and I thought, well, that was obviously from the Lord, because we are watching, even within prophecy circles. And I think, Brandon, one of the troubling things is people a year or two ago say, well, I stand with Israel, and suddenly they can't quote anything other than Genesis chapter 12. I bless those who bless thee, I'll curse those who curse thee. They have no other scriptural reference or understanding or basis for what the Bible actually says regarding Israel and God's relationship with Israel. And much to the chagrin of those who are in replacement theology, they'll say, well, that's just Old Testament. No, it's New Testament also. And you already mentioned Romans chapter 11. So we see it not just in Romans chapter 11, but you see this. It's God's plan of redemption. It doesn't just include Israel. Israel is is foundational to be able to understand God's plan of redemption and Jesus coming back. Israel has to be here. And so we follow it through. As you know, when it comes to Bible prophecy and replacement theology specifically, what's happened is people are so basically, well, Bible prophecy ended when Jesus came the first time, ascended to heaven, sent his Holy Spirit. Well, then, so do you stop studying all future prophecies regarding the nation of Israel and the Jewish people and the second coming of Christ? Because it isn't just for the Jews, it's also for us. But we are tied together in this if we are willing to look at the Bible.
Absolutely. And we got into Romans 11 last night. We'll have to pick it up after Thanksgiving. But today on radio, I had our reporter on the ground in Israel, a Messianic Jew, Aaron Lavarco was with me. And I titled the broadcast, and part two will have to be on Tuesday, a Gentile and a Jew look at Romans 11, a Gentile and a Jew looking at Romans 11, because we see that olive tree, which is that place of privilege, as Charles Ryrie and so many have described it in their study of that text. And then, but the root is the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob blessing of the Jews, which gave us the Messiah, the Word of God. We're all blessed by that, Jew and Gentile. Genesis 12, as you said, already speaks to that, I believe. But there was a passing over because they rejected Christ. And so we went to the Gentiles, and we were blessed by that with the starting of the church. But as you said, we have to have the Jews in the land, Ezekiel 37, politically revived. And then we're waiting for spiritual revival. And they must do that in order to cry out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And boom, the second coming. And we have those Jews that were martyred, the Jews that made it through physically, persevered through the tribulation, and they received the millennial kingdom, the promises of Genesis 15. They'll fulfill the Mosaic covenant, not to be confused with the Abrahamic covenant, which we see so many people like John Piper want to quote Romans chapter 11, verse 28. They are enemies. And he stops. And I showed the screenshot where he stops quoting the verse, mid-verse, verse 28, Romans 11. Why doesn't he finish the rest of 28, 29, 30? Why doesn't he do that? Because it says what? These are irrevocable promises, and I will show mercy to them, just as I showed mercy to you, the Gentiles. I mean, Pastor, is it these guys don't know the Bible? Or are they that deceptive? Or is it their anti-Semitism, whether recognized or not? Is it a presupposition they come to the text with and they're going to defend it at all costs, even if it means chopping out the scriptures?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I don't know, and even when it comes, I mean, these guys are like a guy like Piper, he knows what the Bible says.
Of course he does.
So with that, certain individuals have made a conscious decision to ignore that. To ignore, God says this is irrevocable. It cannot be revoked. The gifts and callings of God they can't be revoked. And God is specifically talking about Israel in that passage in Romans chapter 11. So it obviously, to someone like Piper, it's very troubling to them because it confronts what their theology is. By the way, this also, it's the same group that has to attack the rapture of the church, because these two are tied together, because obviously just the whole subject that we are dealing with when it comes to the dispensations. And if you have a rapture, then you also have this time that is coming in the future that is specific for the Jews. Listen, God is very clear in the Bible that this does have to do with the redemption of Israel. And he's going to bring Israel through their pain and suffering. They're going to go through great trials. They're going to go through the fiery furnace, is how the Bible describes it. Of course, obviously in the book of Daniel, for example. But again, you still have this in the New Testament too. The Apostle Paul, if replacement theology had any validity, then when the Apostle Paul went from synagogue to synagogue to preach and teach the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, he would have gone to the synagogues and said, it's all over for you. Because if anybody would have known about replacement theology, it would have been the Apostle Paul, who was a Jewish believer. So I look at this and think these arguments are absurd. And I'm sure you've had the same challenge I've had. I've asked people to come on my program and said, let's just talk this. We don't have to argue. We don't even have to debate. But let's talk through this. And I said, this is what I'll do. I will bring the Bible into our conversations, what I'll do. And we'll talk about Israel and God's future plan for Israel. When I was in Israel just recently, last week, I was meeting with a friend of mine. He's Jewish, not a believer in Jesus. And we had an interesting question in the lobby of the hotel. So there are several other people that were sitting around listening, which I wasn't really paying any attention to them. But he had a question about replacement theology. And he said, I'm not real familiar with it, but I've been hearing more and more people that are just done with us Jews, that God has replaced us and it's coming from the church. And he said, can you explain it to me? And I said, I sure can. And I said, basically what you have to do in the New Testament is wherever you see the word Israel, you just take a pencil, you cross out Israel and you put church in there. And as you already mentioned earlier in the program, what they'll do is they'll take the blessings to Israel, but they don't want the cursings, and that also comes from the Mosaic covenant. People get that confused. But as I'm talking with them, I said, here's the thing. I said, you and I are, in a sense, closer to understanding the prophecies regarding the coming Messiah. I said, here's the deal. As you know, I believe the Messiah is coming again. I believe Jesus is the Messiah. He's coming again. I said, you look at the prophetic prophecies and you say he didn't fulfill those things, therefore he's not the Messiah. But when you still look at the prophecies regarding the coming Messiah, the son of David, he's going to be a conqueror. The government will be on his shoulders, Isaiah chapter 9. You look at those things as still being future. I said, I also look at those things as still being future when Jesus comes second time. Replacement theology has to say, it's done. And those things aren't still future because they have to do with the nation of Israel and the second coming of Christ. So you have to do some type of gymnastics. You have to make passages either allegorical or symbolic in order to make them fit. You have to take the entire book of Revelation and say it doesn't apply right now. I was reading an article in the New York Times several years ago, and it was an editorial by someone that you and I would both recognize, a theologian. And he said, well, wherever you see Paul talking about, he brought specifically 1 Thessalonians. And he says, whenever you see Paul talking about something that sounds like the second coming of Christ, you got to know it's always poetic. It's poetry at that point. So you can't actually take those as literal. And I thought, well, this is what you have to do. You have to say we can't take these passages literal, because if you do, you have a problem with the rapture, you have a problem with the second coming of Christ, you have a problem with the nation of Israel, you have a problem with the Jews.
And you have a problem with the millennial kingdom for a lot of them.
You have a huge problem with the millennial kingdom. And you also, I know this is going to be really offensive to a lot of people, but you make God to be a liar when you say God's done with the nation of Israel.
You and I have not rehearsed this. But I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that is what we've been repeating over and over. These people they are maligning the character and nature of God. They are blaspheming God. They are making him out to be a liar. And they think that's going to come with no consequence. I mean, when we get to the very end of the book of Revelation, there is a curse. There are plagues on those who add to or take away from this book. I mean, that's bad enough. But then you start blaspheming God. Right? I mean, this doesn't go unpunished.
Absolutely. Going back to, I know you just taught on Romans chapter 11, but I can't help but think it's in verse 25 where Paul writes, I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brethren, unless you be puffed up in your own mind. And Paul is addressing the fact that people go down this stage of replacement theology. They become arrogant and they look at Brandon House and Tom Hughes as being, well, you guys, you just don't understand. You're not of the enlightened one. Paul says you'll be puffed up in your own mind when you think God's done with the nation of Israel. And that's exactly what we see. You're talked down to, you're put down in seminaries. But the fact is, you ignore, how much of the Bible do you have to ignore when you eliminate the nation of Israel. Yeah, pretty much have to eliminate the whole Old Testament. And then you look at the New Testament and go, wait a minute, these are Jewish authors apart from Luke. Hey, that's another problem. And it's interesting. There's 170 different references in the Bible to the people of Israel, Jacob, the tribes of Jacob. Who's that about? That's the Jews being back in the land in the last days, that God has given them the land. 170 different references, whether they have the land, it came from God, or they'll be back in the land in the last days, as Isaiah says, a second time. And what's interesting about that, Brandon, when Isaiah writes that they'll be drawn back into the land a second time, they weren't even kicked out the first time yet. So Isaiah is writing, he's warning about Assyria, because Assyria was threatening at the time Isaiah wrote, but also about the coming Babylonians who were going to come against Judah. But they hadn't even been kicked out the first time yet. And Isaiah is saying, but this is what's going to happen. A second time it's going to happen, but you will come back a second time. Amos says you'll never be uprooted again. God says, my name is on the covenant. And although you sinned against me wherever you went, I will draw you back into the land, because my name is on the covenant and is in the covenant. In fact, he even put Abram to sleep in Genesis chapter 15, because God knew that no man could keep up his side of that covenant. So God did it. God's name is on the covenant. And God said, even though you sinned against me, I'm bringing you back, because, listen, it's about me. Mm. And here's the strange thing with it, Brandon. What we see is, we see in God's plan for Israel, we see grace and mercy. And suddenly, many in the church say, well, that grace and mercy doesn't apply to Israel, it only applies to us. What? This is God's plan, and he picked a people to bring his plan through. Not just the land, he gave them the land. I stood just recently on the mountaintop. In fact, we were in Jordan also, Mount Nebo, where Abraham is looking out. And then when we were over by Gerizim and looking with Abraham, where he would have been looking out there too, in the area of Gerizim and above Shechem, and seeing that. God says, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to bring you back into the land. But he gave them the land. He made them a nation. He gave them the city of Jerusalem, which he called Zion, 152 times in the King James Bible, no matter what the anti-Zionists say. He gave us the Jewish Messiah. He is the Jewish Messiah. And you're looking going, and this has nothing to do with Israel going forward? If there's no Jewish Messiah, because they're trying to de-Judaize the Bible, de-Judaize Jesus. They try to say he's a Palestinian. You crazy? The word Palestine wasn't even invented yet. Nevertheless, it's really a spiritual attempt to eliminate the hope that we have in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Mm. You said so many wonderful things there. The story of redeeming you, redeeming me, redeeming those in this listening audience tonight that have been redeemed, all comes to really the story of the whole Bible, the glory of God, right? His glory, redeeming the Jews. It reveals his glory, his mercy, his grace, redemption, but it all points to his glory, right? And yet we have people that seem to be attacking, as you say, rightly, the word of God, his character, his nature, his promises, covenants. And yet some of them, they make their whole ministry about, we're here to glorify God. And there's always glorify God, even to the point where we want to be involved in Christian hedonism and whatever that means, John Piper. You're the guy always talking about the glory of God. And yet now here is a great opportunity to reveal in your teaching the glory of God through the program of the church and Israel as eternally memorialized in the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven and sitting on earth. And you want to rip the scriptures out of context as you do? And I can't help but notice, Pastor Hughes, that it seems to be the common theme with many of them is their neo-Calvinism, their hyper-Calvinism. And no, now we have a works-based gospel that merges sanctification and justification. John Piper, you must pursue holiness and slay sin for final salvation. I mean, where is that in the Bible? It's not by works, lest any man should boast. They confuse justification, sanctification, and they end up with this works. this perseverance. They've now defined everything through the tulip of Calvin, who writes his Institutes 24 months after getting saved and says you could rewrite his whole doctrine from Augustine or Augustine. Really? The Catholic's Catholic. And we wonder, as they follow Calvin and you read Calvin, you think you're reading Hitler when he talks about the Jews. You read some of the stuff by Luther, you think you're reading Hitler, but of course, Luther ends up being quoted 3 times by Hitler in Mein Kampf. You're reading Augustine with the same thing. And I'm like, well, no wonder. These guys seem to start with a presupposition every time. What did Calvin say about it? And, Luther, I think, even mocked the idea of the book of Revelation as being the writings of a madman. And you see this continual stream from this group of people to the point I have to say to my audience, unashamedly, I say, I believe that when we get to glory, we're going to see that one of the biggest demonic influences in the modern church in America and around the world has been this neo-Calvinism, this hyper-Calvinism that has now spread like a cancer to many Protestant churches that were not even reformed in their history. And I'm not talking about the Reformed theology of Charles Ryrie or any of these, Schaeffer or any of these guys. I'm talking the neo-Calvinists. But you got it spilling into Baptist churches and Baptist denominations that didn't do this. But now they go and they drink from the well of Together for the Gospel. They drink from the well of the Gospel Coalition. They drink from the well of those guys that are part of that, like Piper and others. And they drag this poison back to the sheep. And I think this is largely in part why we are here today, because they have started with thus saith John Calvin and a few of their other favorites, and then everything is put through that grid or eliminated from the scriptures based on that. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, it's all put through that grid. And this is why I try to get people on. Let's just talk about what the Bible actually does say. Don't stop partway through Romans chapter 11, verse 28. Let's read the whole thing. Let's read it all in context. And by the way, speaking of the glory of God, going back to the nation of Israel, God tells Israel in the book of Deuteronomy, I chose you, not because you were great, not because you were marvelous, not because of all those things. I chose you because you were the least of all nations. Because I was going to be glorified in what is least. Same way that God is glorified in the worst of sinners that are saved. And somehow, all of these grace, the grace and mercy, it only applies to those who aren't Jewish, aren't of Israel. It only applies to the Gentile world. That makes no sense when you look at the nature of God. How can you glorify God when you eliminate the very thing that God stands for, and the very thing that He founded? And we think of also, you just finished the book of Revelation chapter 19, verse 10. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So if you eliminate that, and to eliminate prophecy, you have to eliminate the nation of Israel. You absolutely have to. That's probably why these guys, all of them that you're quoting, why they hate prophecy so much, because it puts Israel into the right biblical perspective. Nevertheless, if you want more, these guys, as you know, Brandon, they all say, well, we just want to teach Jesus. We want to have more of Jesus. Well, if the testimony of Jesus is spirit of prophecy, that means you have to cut out. How much of Jesus are you cutting out when you don't teach Bible prophecy, when you don't teach about the nation of Israel? Everything that we have spiritually came through the nation of Israel and the people of Israel and the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. All of these things did, which leads us up to Jesus himself.
100%.
So what are you eliminating if you're saying I want more of Jesus, but cut out the prophecy and cut out the Israel stuff? That presents a huge problem, because the prophetic word begins in the book of Genesis and doesn't conclude until we get to the end of the book of Revelation. So if you're cutting out prophecy in Israel, what's that say about Revelation chapter 19, verse 10? Well, I guess they say if it's writings of a madman or it's just allegorical, I guess that's how you have to get, I guess you just have to deal with it that way.
Well, they're creating straw men to prop up their false theology. You mentioned Genesis and Revelation. And I often remind our audience, particularly on radio, that Genesis and Revelation are two of the most rejected books of the Bible in many regards by modern day evangelicalism. We don't want to start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created. No, that's not sophisticated enough. That's not scientific enough, they say. So we'll go with Tim Keller and biologos and the idea of Adam and Eve were, allegorical creatures. They're not real. So we'll do that. And you see that, of course, being funded by the Templeton Foundation, John Templeton, who wanted to create a world religion that didn't rely on any sacred writings. So he funds it and helps get biologos kicked off. So these guys are now running around. They don't want to teach Genesis. Interesting enough, as you mentioned, we see the nation of Israel mentioned all through there, particularly as we get into Genesis 12, 13, all the way down. Then you go over to Revelation. Well, they don't want to touch that either, because now they got to pick an eschatology, and they don't want to upset people and divide people and nickels and noses. So two of the books, one beginning, one the end, these end books of history, they don't want to touch those two books. I find that very ironic. Do you not?
I find it so obvious that it is a spiritual battle. We think of the glory of God. The entire book is for the glory of God. So if you eliminate Genesis and Revelation and anything else in it you don't like, I mean, Thomas Jefferson did that.
Yes, he did.
Create a Bible in his image. That's what they are doing. As you mentioned, they run it through the grid of their preconceived theology. And hence, so you have to eliminate, you create the Bible you want. Another book, as you know, that's attacked often as not being authentic is the book of Daniel. Well, why is that? Well, maybe because Jesus said something about the book of Daniel in all of its discourse when he's talking about the abomination of desolation as a fact that it's going to happen, as a fact that Israel will be back in the land, as a fact that salvation would come to Israel. And what's really happening in Isaiah chapter 14, the enemy of our soul says, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High God. I will raise myself above the heavens. Wait a minute. Of course, God says, I'm going to bring you down to the lowest parts of the pit. But what is really happening? And also, I couldn't help but think of just a couple of verses that popped in my mind. One of them is in Psalm 14, where David writes, oh, that salvation of Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord brings back the captivity of his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad. Well, that's kind of a problem. Right there you have Zion, Jacob, salvation, Israel brought back, Israel rejoice in salvation in their Messiah, the Messiah, Jesus. Another one, Brandon, I don't know how much time we have.
We're good. We're doing good.
Okay. Once you start me, I start talking. I'll tell you.
That's why we love. That's the kind of guest we love. Make my job easy.
In Psalm 2, we know the Psalm well. Why do the nations plot rage and the people plot a vain thing or conspiracy? The kings of the earth set themselves together against the Lord, against his anointed. Let us break their bonds in pieces, cast away their cords from us. That is ultimately this book. They're saying, cast it away from us. And this is interesting. God says, I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Asking me, I will give to you the nations for your inheritance. That is speaking of Zion. The nations are saying, we are done with Israel. Let's cut off this book and everything that represents regarding the Messiah. Again, the Jewish Messiah. You go back to the days of Hitler. The Nazis attempted to de-Judaize the New Testament because it was a problem for them. And we see the same thing happening today. De-Judaize the New Testament, de-Judaize Jesus. Jesus was, of course, the absurdity. He was a Palestinian. What a lie that is. Mary and Joseph, now they're trying to say, oh, they were Palestinians too. It's de-Judaized because the enemy of our souls wants to set himself above God. The only way he can do that is to eliminate the Jews so that Jesus can't come back and the Jews can't cry out, Zechariah chapter 12, that they would look upon him whom they pierced, that they would say, as Jesus says in Matthew 23, when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, that day will come when you will say it. But until that day comes, I'm going away. The day will come when you will say it, and I will come back. It was Hosea chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. I am going to return again when you acknowledge your offense and you call upon me, and then I will come back. Satan doesn't want that to happen. It's infiltrated the church, and the problem is Christians are not taught the Bible. They're only
right.
taught certain things about the Bible.
They're not taught the Bible. And I don't know your age, but I'll tell you, I think you and I were kind of raised in the same generation. And to
I'll tell you, so I graduated from high school in 77.
Okay, I graduated in 88, or 11 years apart.
So I'm old enough to remember what you're going to bring up.
Yeah. So you and I were basically raised in the same generation at a time, and when we were in the 70s and 80s, did we ever think with all of the Bible churches, right? You could pretty much walk into any self-described evangelical church, Bible church, you'd hear the clear gospel. You would hear a lot about Bible prophecy in some of these churches, particularly in the 70s, thanks to the late great Planet Earth and Hal Lindsey and others. You would hear some worldview coming from Francis Schaeffer. There was so much going on, right, in the 70s and 80s. And you had Christian radio exploding in growth, Christian television, publishing houses, colleges, Christian colleges and universities, 70s and 80s, Christian literature, Bible prophecy books, so much going on that you and I grew up in, and seeing that launched in those 2 decades of the 70s and 80s, right? And now obviously continued some into the 90s, no doubt about it. But you and I were raised at a time when we would look around, right? And we would see Christian bookstores that we would walk into. And we would turn on Christian radio. And we would see the Christian newspapers and the Moody Monthly and all of these magazines and publications. Did you ever think then that one day this massive, large audience of largely dispensational Christians, whether they knew they were or not, would shrink down so small to the point there will only be a handful of us that are teaching and proclaiming from the Word of God this same message, that what we are seeing, that we are overloaded with such great information and speakers and content and conferences, and they were doing documentaries like the late great Planet Earth and others, and it will all be shrunk down to a small audience of Bible teachers, prophecy teachers, worldview guys, and we will be viciously attacked, not only by so-called Christians and so-called the church, but we'll be attacked even by those in the political movement who will have picked up on this, John Rich and others, saying that what we believe was invented by John Darby. I mean, the dumbest thing in the world. We've shown on our broadcast how we can go back to the early church fathers, first century, and show you where they were teaching these things. Did you ever think this massive movement and force and engine of the Protestant evangelical church that was spreading through the world to teach this would be shrunk down? And now there's not many of us left. There really is not. And, I say to my wife, the only good thing I can say is, well, we don't have a lot of competition, because where are you going to go to get this kind of teaching and news and information through the lens of a biblical worldview and Bible prophecy? You, me, Dr. Woods, Dr. Rob Lindstead, the others I can mention. There's not a lot of us, is there? Can you believe this huge movement has come down to this small group of people teaching this?
So I'll answer this as quick as I can. So I would say yes and no. No, I didn't, in the one sense that I was watching everything. Now, I got saved in 88, right? And Hal Lindsey's book and documentary, Late Great Planet Earth, were very effective. It was Bible prophecy that really got me to start thinking about the Bible. But I was surrounded by my Protestant friends, a church, and all of these different things. It was a different era. For anybody alive in the 70s and 80s, it was a different era. So I didn't really expect it. Even into the 90s, listening to Christian radio all the time, watching good Christian programming, I didn't really expect it, except here, Brandon. I was really starting to study Bible prophecy a lot when you roll around to 1990, an awful lot at that time. And with that, there's certain telltale signs in the Bible, like 1 Timothy chapter 4, in the last days there will be doctrines of demons, deceiving spirits, teaching lies and hypocrisy. 2 Timothy chapter 4, the last days perilous times will come. What? Evil men will wax worse, evil men and imposters. That talks about church leaders. Evil men and imposters will wax worse and worse, but you make sure that you stay strong in the faith which you got your start. And then a very interesting thing, I know you know all these scriptures, but maybe for your viewers, they might be enlightening to them. As Paul continues in 2 Timothy chapter 4, he says, hey, the people will not endure sound doctrine. In other words, it literally means they will no longer put up with the truth. Speaking of the truth of the Bible, they will not put up with the truth anymore. Instead, they will bring for themselves teachers that itch their ears and bring in fables and feel-good stories is what it means. And that's what's happened. And then, of course, when it comes to the Bible prophecy world, man, Brandon, are we seeing it shrink with teachers? Because I look and think, how many teachers of Bible prophecy were actually faithful to teach the word? And this is what I think part of the problem has been. You have to be faithful in the word, or you're going to get all sidetracked by all kinds of crazy things out there. And next thing you know what you're going to do, you're going to start blaming Israel. You're going to start going down the path of all these other people, which leads us to 2 Peter chapter 3. In the last days, scoffers will come, walking according to their own lusts, saying, where's the promise of his coming? Our fathers used to talk about that. In other words, we used to believe that stuff. We used to hear it at church in the 70s, in the 80s, sometimes in the 90s. We know all about Tim LaHaye. Yeah, we used to hear about this stuff, but very interesting, Brandon. He says they're walking according to their own lusts, and then they start scoffing and mocking us. And these are people who once would have walked with us. Mm-hmm. They become the mockers.
Which really brings us to that false dominant church, I think, which is where we're heading quickly, of Revelation, which I think is Revelation 17:1, that woman, that harlot, I should say, the harlot that sits on many waters. I think that's a false dominant church. And then there's a scene change. John's carried away into the wilderness, and he sees now a woman riding a scarlet beast. And I think you got to have that false dominant church that helps to lay the foundation, as all politicians love to use religion and religious institutions. And the Antichrist will use it before he turns halfway through the book of Revelation 17, and he and his 10 world assistants devour and eat it of her flesh. I think that's a false dominant church. He's been set up. I think he's devouring it. He's used it. He doesn't need it anymore. Now he sets up himself to be worshiped. And I think what we're seeing is this false dominant church. It just has happened quicker than I anticipated, and with denominations and people I never expected. Now, let me switch gears because we could go all night. Donald Trump today released an executive order, and I know most of our audience probably is hearing this for the first time. Take a look, folks, at the screen. Released tonight, this afternoon, launching the Genesis mission. And what he's going to do, folks, he's going to use AI, and he's going to take a bunch of scientists, and they're going to use AI to develop even more technology. The Genesis mission will bring together our nation's research and development resources, combining the efforts of brilliant American scientists, including those at the national laboratories, with pioneering American businesses, world-renowned universities, and existing research infrastructure, data repositories, production plants, and national security sites to achieve dramatic acceleration in AI development and utilization. I believe that what Donald Trump is doing, whether he knows it or not, with guys like Peter Thiel, who are running around with Curtis Yarvin, and all these, Larry Ellison, I believe these guys are building the Antichrist beast system. I don't think it is the beast system yet, but I think they're laying the foundation for a China-style social credit score system. No one will be able to buy or sell. Reported on our newscast tonight that now we have the Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol. They're taking license pictures. They're taking pictures of our license plates as we travel. And if we're involved in any travel that they seem and find to be suspicious as to where we're going and coming from, they then will call local authorities that they're working with, pull you over, and then work to search your car. I'm all for cracking down on crime. But what I see coming are basically 15-minute UN World Economic Forum cities, and eventually you can see how quick they're going to be able to track down anyone who becomes a believer in the tribulation. And man, the harvest of people becoming believers is so many, the Bible says you can hardly number it, but they're being slaughtered almost as quick. And you're wondering, how is it they can do this? And you can start telling pretty quick with people's patterns online, what they're reading, the sites they're going to, maybe the sites they're no longer going to. Their algorithm has changed. They've gone from reading a lot of demonic stuff, occultic stuff, New Age stuff, whatever it is they're involved in. And all of a sudden they're running over here and they're looking for stuff by Pastor Tom Hughes and Andy Woods and Brandon House. You know, we're gone, but they're looking for our stuff and they're reading and listening. And pretty quick, the algorithm can say, this person's changed all their habits consistent with someone who's just started following Christ. Go get them. I mean, it's amazing what's being done.
It is. So with that, I mean, you said a lot there. But with that, this is where another part of the deception has been. By the way, you're the first person I've ever heard mention Curtis Yarvin. For all of your viewers, I would say you got to do research on that guy. He is behind the scenes pulling strings that he's very good friends with Peter Thiel, but that's another story. But he's worth looking into. Just that's another subject in and of itself. Okay, with that, I look and go, people think on the right, let's talk Christian right, Bible-believing Christian right, not the other right, right? We know the woke right, not the woke right. They think that all of a sudden prophecy has stopped because Trump's president.
Yep.
I would say the opposite. We are going full speed ahead. What's happened is if we look back to Joe Biden or Barack Obama, all of us were shouting from the rooftops, hey, look out, watch out, this is what they're doing. So some of us are still shouting from the rooftops, hey, watch out, look what they're doing. And people are saying, we don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear it anymore. Look, we got our president in, everything's going fine. Look at what you just pointed out from today alone, just with this executive order. You start looking at this going, where's all of this going? We are watching what's going on in the UK. Friends, don't think that isn't coming here to America. And all of the groundwork, I 100% agree, Brandon. This is the groundwork of the beast system that is coming. The system that is being built is a system that nobody can escape from. It was years ago. It was 2018. I was speaking at a prophecy conference in Santa Barbara, and this speaks to everything that you're saying, Brandon. And I said, here's what's going to happen. It's coming during the tribulation period where you're going to be going down the road and in your car, you know, if you're not raptured and you're still here, you're going down the road in your car, and all of a sudden, your car doors are going to lock. Your car is going to pull you over until the authorities get there to arrest you, and you will not be able to get out of your car. This guy approached me afterwards. He said, that's never going to happen. They don't even have technology like that. I said, this is 2018, and this is, friends, this is what is coming. I mean, to think that, I talked with people and think, well, I'm not in a database. I don't have a smartphone. Nobody knows where I am. I said, I'm telling you, listen, the moment you were born, the doctor slapped your behind, you started crying, and everything about you was entered into a book, into a database, maybe handwritten back then, maybe typed. It went into a database that is now in a computerized database somewhere. Every dentist visit you ever had, every school you went to or school you didn't go to. Even during the days of COVID, not only was it documented the people who complied, it also was documented the people who didn't comply. Every single thing we have is being collected on us with the intention to use against us, and that day is approaching. I don't worry about it, and we don't worry about it because we know our citizenship is in heaven, but we don't worry, but we do warn. So that's what we do.
We don't worry, but we do warn. And of course, for those of us with children, with grandchildren, you know, the best thing we can do is evangelize them so they go with us, and then we won't have to worry about them.
Amen. Amen. I like that.
In closing here, let's talk about the Antichrist. You know, the left has failed. And now, sadly, I think President Trump is failing. I mean, he's making nice with Mamdani in the Oval Office. He's going to let Qatar have a base in Idaho. He's making excuses for 600,000 Chi-Coms to continue into our country, to keep propped up Marxist schools. He wants H-1B visas to continue because I guess we're not smart enough, but we turn out now that they're mostly entry-level jobs. I mean, he's stumbling and failing. Has he done a few things I'm happy with? Absolutely. But overall, this is not turning out well, and he hasn't even been here a year. And I think what's going to happen, if I were to guess, unless he changes direction, there's going to be such a dissatisfaction with people on the left, dissatisfaction with people on the right, that it sets the stage for algorithms more and more. It's like, why do we need these politicians? They're on the take. They're using their jobs to enrich themselves. They go in hardly worth anything. They come out multimillionaires. The judges are political. The judges are hacks to the right, to the left. Just turn more and more over to algorithms, and let's get out of the way and let them do it in a, quote, non-biased way, they're told, right? And that seems to be what Doge is setting up, and all these other groups are setting up, is to make people so unsatisfied with the way things are today that people will cry out for another system, one that happens to be being built by Peter Thiel, so we can either go with the Antichrist system or Armageddon, but maybe there's a third option, right? But I also wonder if not only do we see more and more turned over to an algorithm system, but that people also get sick of the right and the left altogether. And they're sick of Congress. They're sick of parliaments. And on the stage walks a guy performing counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, who can say, all of these politicians have failed you guys on the left, in the middle, on the right, be they Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, Fabian Socialist, you know, the Keynesian economics guys, the Labor Party, they've all failed you. But I can bring you, using technology, I can bring it all together for everyone so we have real peace in the world, promising peace. But you know what? Politicians always say that. They always promise. And you guys are sick of the promising, aren't you? So I'll tell you what, I want to validate my ability to actually deliver on my promise and promises. So let me show you something. And he performs counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders. You know, you and I know Jesus didn't do these miracles because he was doing magic shows. He was validating the authority from which he could speak as the Son of God. And here comes the Antichrist performing counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders in order to validate who he says he is, what he says he can do. So you don't have to take my word for future promises. Have any of your politicians ever been able to do this? No. They can't do the supernatural. I can do the supernatural. Now, if I can do this in the supernatural world, what do you think I can do in your natural world if you give me the chance? And I think the world is being set up with a disgust for the left, the middle, and the right. And they're being so intrigued with UFOs and our Pentagon releasing paperwork and videos of UFOs. I don't know if this guy shows up on a craft and walks out as some more highly evolved, intelligent species from another planet, as we've all decades of Darwinian evolution, or where he comes from, how he arises. I know my friend Ron Carlson concluded his book with Ed Decker, Fast Facts on False Teaching, saying he would be shocked if a UFO showed up, unidentified flying object, and outwalked this benevolent entity. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're being conditioned for. Maybe it's someone that's on the world scene now. We just see in the corners of camera shots. What are your thoughts on this?
I think all of the above. So I am fed up with the right and the left.
Yes.
I mean, but I do think that's part of the plan. You know, if let's use that as a starting point. Then I want to get into UFOs and a few other things too. So when we look at, people are upset over just about everything right now. We have the insane transgender stuff. Anybody that just has any mental stability at all can look at that. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You know it's just wrong. Biology is biology. You know, we're told trust the science, and then suddenly the people don't want to trust the science because science says there's boy and girl. I mean, plants are male and female. When you call your vet and they say, is your dog a male or female, or one of the other 100 possibilities? The vet doesn't say that. There are no other possibilities. So people are fed up. They're fed up with being lied to. People know they're being lied to. And I do think that's what's going to happen. Person's going to come along, and it could very well be the technology, the algorithms that bring about this system. We know that Antichrist has to seem omniscient, all-knowing, and obviously the way to do that, we can see it now with technology. All-knowing and also omnipotent, all-powerful. Technology that is here right now. It's, by the way, it's been here for a long time. Check this out, Brandon. So I interviewed my dad several years ago, because in the 1960s, he worked for a company called Teledyne. And they were one of the foundational companies which later became the Silicon Valley. And it was 1963. My dad told me the story when he was there. The reason my dad worked for them is because he went to college and he was a metallurgist, chemistry. And so he was helping to develop the computer chip, the transistor, and then the chip. And that's why he was brought on, because he had that knowledge, and he got to know all of these tech people that were prior to Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, prior to those guys. And he said he was invited, I have it all on video, and he was invited to a party above the Hollywood Hills. And he said one of the guys came along, he says Henry Singleton or maybe Claude Shannon, who was the father of information theory, who developed the transistor, by the way. And he said, he put his arm around me and he said, do you see all those houses out there? It was nighttime. You can see all the lights in the LA basin. And he said, one day we're going to control every person. This is 1963. My dad told me he had a very eerie feeling. He wasn't just talking about Los Angeles. He's talking about the world. That takes us, that's what, 60 some years ago. So, and then we look at technology, the things we are being told, listen, the things we're being told were probably developed 10, 15, 20 years ago. And what's happening now is just the conditioning of the people to want to receive all of the technology, to want to be marked, to want to be chipped, to want to go along with the system. That's all we're in right now, Brandon. I believe it's the last stage to condition the masses to receive what's already been developed. And, you know, you start looking at Stargate and the technology that's necessary to connect everybody at the same time. It's here. It's just getting the people on board, upsetting the people, getting them to hate the right, hate the left, hate each other, not trust anybody, not trust anybody. We don't know anymore. That's why we're told don't turn to the left or right. Trust only in this book, because deception is going to be great. So it's the conditioning of the masses. And going back to our original beginning of the program, when it comes to the nation of Israel, oh, let me tell you, Brandon, as you know, they are being conditioned. How many Jews worldwide right now would raise their hand and say, is there somebody that can make the anti-Semitism stop? Is there somebody that will come to Israel and make the wars go away so we can just get along with our neighbors? I personally agree with you. Trump's plans for the Middle East, they're not going to work. His peace plans, they're not going to work. The things he's doing here, I forgot. When I was in Israel, I forgot all about his Qatar deal for that base. Where is it again?
Idaho.
I forgot all about that. I mean, there's so many things that happen every day.
Well, let's not forget, I guess his son-in-law was bailed out for his building with Qatar, and the building just happens to be, what, on Fifth Avenue, 666 Fifth Avenue? I mean,
that's right.
You can't make this stuff up, right? And then Steve Witkoff, I think he got some help somewhere along the way with some of these guys. And then the golf clubs and whatnot in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and it's starting to be like, okay, wait a minute. I think we got some conflicts of interest here. But I was really rooting for him to be successful in the first term, and was really wanting him to be successful in the second term. But something has gone off course. But of course, I think, again, this is all part of the spiritual deception in the Ephesians 6 battle that we're in. And God is stepping back. And I think he is letting, he's using the sinful choices of man to accomplish his ultimate purpose. He's not the author of confusion. He's not the author of evil, but he steps back and lets man do what's in their heart, and he's going to order it all together, and we're going to see the end result. But here is what I ask you in closing. Antichrist, Gentile or Jew, false prophet, Gentile or Jew. I think the Antichrist is a Gentile. I think he comes out of the sea. I think the false prophet is Jewish. He comes out of the land. Not we're starting a new denomination over. I think the two witnesses are Elijah and Moses. Your thoughts on those two? Those four, actually.
If I were to lay it all out there and I had to categorize my guesses, I would guess that you are, I would guess the same as you. I believe Antichrist is Gentile. Every type of Antichrist in the Bible was Gentile. Had a great conversation with Mondo Gonzalez about that I'll be posting in the not too distant future. He has some very intriguing thoughts that have caused me to think about some things. The false prophet, Jewish makes the most sense, and there has to be something that's going to intrigue the Jews. It could be part of the false prophet, part of reasoning with Jews on religious things to maybe advance the Mosaic covenant and the building of the temple.
Yes.
Could very well be.
And then for him to set up the image in the temple and give it breath, which I find interesting. The word used for breath is same used over in Acts for spirit. So it seems like a demonic spirit is breathed into that thing. But how is a prophet doing that in the temple unless he's Jewish and they're accepting him setting that thing up?
Well, yeah. Plus, interesting also that now you mentioned that in Revelation 13, it's the false prophet that tells everybody worship the beast. Mm-hmm. Huh. So you have this whole religious dynamic that's there, and it was Antichrist. And
the two witnesses,
Moses and Elijah. My guess is Moses and Elijah make the most sense, representing the law and the prophets. And we can go into other things. I know people want to argue, is it Elisha and Elijah, because Elisha, not Enoch and Elijah, because Enoch didn't die. They go into that or whatever. But the most sense to me would be Moses and Elijah. However, it could be two, I would think, Jewish prophets who aren't in the Bible, but God has raised them up in the last days. But nevertheless, if I were to put it all into categories, I would categorize it the same as you. And I know people out there say, well, don't you know the false prophet has to be the Pope? Well, the popes do some crazy things. There's no doubt. They tend to have two horns like a lamb and speak like a dragon. But I wouldn't pin my tail on the donkey of the Pope just yet.
I agree with you.
I tend, your thinking is what resonates the most with my thinking.
Oh, and then I have to mention Babylon. When I wrote the book, The Coming Religious Reich, in 2015, I said, look, folks, Revelation 18, Babylon is Babylon. Rome is Rome, Jerusalem's Jerusalem, Babylon's Babylon, okay? Oh, no, Babylon's New York, they would say, and they would send me all these books and emails and everything. And I said, look, I'm just trusting the Bible. And of course, all I had going on then was 2 Army War College professors calling for moving the United Nations to Babylon. That's all I had in 2015. Mm-hmm. Well, today we have the Fall Port. Folks who want to look it up, FAW, the Fall Port, being built like crazy. It's pretty well completed, the highway, the port, making it, if not one of the largest commercial port in the world, cutting right through next to Babel in 58 miles south of Baghdad, right through that area of Babylon, hooking in with Europe, a Eurocentric world government. I mean, just look at what's happening in Babylon. So I think Babylon's Babylon. What say you?
Yes, I do. I've probably had the same people sending me their books and videos and everything else about New York City and all these other dynamics. Listen, I get that. I get the thinking on it, but we have to stay with the Bible. If Babylon meant Babylon everywhere except for when you get through the book of Revelation, that makes no sense. And also, here's the other things. I was following all those stories with the military and things going on with that area years ago too. And what's interesting, you mentioned the Fall Port. What people don't realize, and I'm sure the same people that are emailing you saying that nothing's really happening there. Well, behind the curtain over the last 4 years, millions and billions of dollars have been poured into that area. And this is fascinating to me, Brandon. They're always calling it, when you read the articles, if you can come across videos are really hard to come by, but you can find articles, you can find websites. They all call it the same thing. They call it Babylon. I find that fascinating that they actually call it Babylon. I'm reading it going, this is remarkable. And by the way, Neom, which, looked like, could Neom actually connect with Babylon somehow? I have friends that have presented that. Well, Neom, apparently Saudi Arabia, is in all kinds of financial trouble.
Yes, it is.
I heard today they're $4 trillion over budget already.
4 trillion.
4 trillion. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is.
So
even to the U.S. government.
even to the U.S. government.
Well, I'm going to get you back because I know we've got a lot coming, and I'd love to have you back on a more regular basis. I didn't know how it was going to go. I figured it would go well, but I didn't know. I never interviewed you before, and we're just clicking. But I want to talk about financial collapse. I want to talk about World War III. I want to talk about Putin and Russia and what seems to be, I don't know what's going on there. Europe wants World War III so bad. One of the French generals today telling the folks to prepare for your children to die fighting Russia. That's weird. I have a video of it. I want to talk about all that. Have you seen the cover of The Economist magazine? We've been showing it all last week. Have you seen their cover that's predicting what's coming in 2026? Have you seen that?
I have. I'm telling you, when I was in Israel,
You just got back from
Jordan,
Israel, I know.
I'm so out of touch with certain things. I got so focused on what was happening over there in the Mideast.
Well, I'll show it to you, and then you can come back on. Take a look at this.
Okay.
The World Ahead 2026. As you know, this is the big globalist publication, if not the biggest.
Yeah.
You got the Club K cargo over here shooting off missiles, which is in my 2018 documentary, the Club K cargo. You can buy them for about $10 million. They get a satellite signal, the lid opens up, and up pops silos to shoot missiles off of. And it's in my documentary in 2018. Well, here it is on the cover of this Economist magazine shooting at the 250th birthday cake of America, getting a satellite signal to do so. Then we have war everywhere. I don't know what's going on over here. I don't know if that's Trump's fist. Fight, fight, fight. Now they got a handcuff on him, tied back to the cake, and they're going to arrest him. I have no idea. Impeach him. He'll be out of here. They can put in Vance, their Peter Thiel protege. I don't know. But it's funny that is this the Marxist fist? I don't know, but it's over the American flag. We notice tanks, syringes, pills. We have two swords crossed like Islam.
Wow.
And you have a chart, which I thought was the stock market. But the other day I said, you know what? That's not the stock market. That's the death of the dollar. You have money on there with Lincoln, and you see all the dollars falling off the map. I mean, there is so much in here. And here's the Economist magazine. Now, the question is, will that be 2026? They like to predict things like they did about COVID with the children in the hospital beds and the nurses during the Olympics before COVID. Are they a couple years off? I have no idea. I find it interesting on the chart. Putin or Xi Jinping is on one side. Trump is on the other side with the dollar collapse. We got Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRICS system, and all those nations throwing in with them. But study this. Let me know when you can come back. And let's get into the economy, World War III, cashless society, Bible prophecy, wars, rumors of wars, plagues, pestilence, and all of that. What do you say?
That would be great. I'd love to come back. I'd love to have you on my program, too. I think it'd be great. And that cover, there's a lot going on there. Boy, we could do like hours just on that cover alone.
Good.
Wow.
Well, we look forward to having you back. And in the meantime, I want to promote your website and your broadcast. Here is his X, if you want to follow him on X, at Pastor Tom Hughes, at Pastor Tom Hughes. And then Hope for, F-O-R, hopeforourtimes.com is his website. hopeforourtimes.com. You come highly recommended by Dr. Andy Woods and Patrick Wood. I've known who you are for a while, but I asked those guys last week, who's got his contact info? And so I said, I gotta get him on. And it was actually my son, our vice president of operations, that said, you need to get on Pastor Tom Hughes. So I said, yeah, I know he is. I should do that. And he said, well, Andy he goes on Andy's program. Patrick Wood goes on his program. I think he's in our circles. I said, great, let's do it. So I'm glad we made this connection, and let's make it something we do often.
That sounds great, and I'm going to get you on here too. So looking forward to it. It was wonderful. Great to finally meet you.
You too, Tom. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Check out his stuff. You too, my friend. Check out his stuff. There it is at Pastor Tom Hughes and hopeforourtimes.com. Fascinating, a little bit over an hour with Pastor Tom Hughes. I didn't know how long it was going to go tonight. I was not going to set a time limit because I just thought, well, we'll just have a good time. And we're going to do more of that. I think we should do this in the future and open up the phone lines as well. What do you guys think? All right. All right. We're going to be right back after this break.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
It is a proven fact that China is in our power grid. They could bring down our grid anytime they want. Will you be able to communicate with family and friends? Well, I will, because they and myself have a satellite phone from worldviewtalk.com. Worldviewtalk.com. All you got to do is go outside, acquire a satellite, dial the number, hit send, and you are talking to your family and friends, even when all the cell towers are down. Worldviewtalk.com.